Rescue crews have now recovered the body of 21-year-old Dorian Pinson.
3 people lost their lives in Lake Lanier this past weekend.
According to the Department of Natural Resources, more than 200 people have died here at Lake Lanier since 1990.
Lake Lanier is a man-made 38,000-acre lake that attracts about 10 million visitors every year, bringing in around $5 billion annually to North Georgia's economy. The lake is located in the affluent Forsyth County, which has the highest median income in metro Atlanta. This fact is especially interesting considering that the body of water covers what was once a thriving black community called Oscarville. In 1910, the town Oscarville had nearly 1,100 African Americans, and many of the families owned their own land and businesses. The community supported numerous churches and included teachers, professionals, and businesses. All of that changed in 1912 when the neighboring all-white town in Forsyth County, separated by the Chattahoochee River, ran them out, forcing the people of Oscarville to sell their land for cheap or die. The attacks on black residents escalated following the death of May Crow, an 18-year-old white woman resident of Forsyth County. She was found raped and murdered on the banks of Chattahoochee River. With little evidence, the police arrested 4 African Americans: Ernest Knox, Oscar Daniel, Jane Daniel, and Robert Edwards. After Knox allegedly confessed after being tortured, Edwards was lynched by an angry mob before he could make it to trial. Knox and Daniel were both found guilty and hung. Over 5,000 whites gathered to watch the hanging of Knox and Daniel. Decades later, the remains of Oscarville was intentionally flooded. In Forsyth County, there was a black community with more than 1,100 African Americans, most who were freed after fighting in the American Civil War. They owned their own land, operated their own businesses, had their own churches and schools. The town was called Oscarville. Due to the high racial tension from the riots in Atlanta 6 years prior, many were wary of the possible future violence. It was placed, but someone had to burn down the tarp. Over 5,000 people gathered to watch the hanging of 16-year-old Ernest Knox and 18-year-old Oscar Daniel. With little to no evidence, many still believe the boys were innocent. During Jim Crow era, Forsyth County didn't have the whites only and color only signs because there were no black people to be segregated. The racial cleansing of Forsyth County happened in 1912, but didn't make national news until January 1987 when Into Coming Georgia. About 15,000 to 20,000 civil rights marches, many of them black, marched to the courthouse square of Forsyth County, where no blacks have lived for 75 years. The activists were met with violence. Residents were seen throwing rocks and yelling racial slurs at the civil rights activists. The march was led by civil rights leaders Coretta Scott King and Hosea Williams. Hosea Williams stated, "We come back to Forsyth County today to prove that truth crushed to earth shall rise again. Please understand Forsyth County." He goes on to say, "Before we be your slaves, we'd rather be buried in our own graves and go home to our God and be free." The protest also gained the attention of the Oprah Winfrey Show, which had only been airing for 6 months. Oprah invited only the residents of Forsyth to the show to discuss his history as well as the protest that was going on. The protest started to surround the building where the show was being held. Hosea Williams was arrested outside of the building. Inside the building, Oprah was the only person of color in the building as she interviewed residents on their views of why Forsyth should or shouldn't remain all white.
You don't believe that people of other races have the right to live here?
They have the right to live wherever they want to, but we have the right to choose if we want a white community also. That's why we moved here.
You believe. That's what you believe. Excuse me.
As many residents defended their decision to stay all white, some casually using the N-word to Oprah's face, there were dissenters who said the time had come to have blacks and whites living together in the same county. But the majority of the comments shocked Oprah and her production crew so much that they literally got out of town before sundown. Today, Forsyth County, Georgia is the wealthiest county in Georgia, but according to the census, the black community only makes up 4.4% of the population. Whatever is left of Oscarville is at the bottom of Sydney Lake Lanier. Do you think Lake Lanier is haunted? People have seen body figures. People have seen hands come towards them. I want to find out from you, but we're about to dive in. There was an all-white neighboring town in Forsyth County called Cumming, Georgia. The two towns were shared by the Chattahoochee River. On September the 5th, 1912, in Forsyth, Georgia, 22-year-old Ellen Grice, a white resident, said she was awakening to a black man in her bed and that he attempted to rape her. Days later, the Forsyth County Sheriff, William Reed, arrested 5 black men in connection with the case. Isaiah Prickle, John Bates, Tony Howell, Fate Chester, and Joe Rogers. Tony Howell was actually the one accused of the crime, but the other men claim he was with them at the time. All 5 men were put in jail in the Cumming town square. Word of this spread to the black community on September the 7th, 1912. A local pastor by the name of Grant Smith demanded the men be released. Soon after, Smith was beaten by an angry white mob. The mob wanted Smith to be hung or burnt alive. The governor of Georgia, Joseph Mackey Brown, sent the National Guard in to prevent riots and transferred the men to multiple jails for safety, and they ended up being in an Atlanta jail. 2 days later, on September the 9th, 1912, May Crow, 18-year-old white woman, was found on the banks of the Chattahoochee River, raped and murdered. 4 African Americans were arrested, with only speculation and no substantial evidence. The first arrest was 16-year-old boy Ernest Knox, who was arrested at his home. Knox was then coerced into a confession by a prominent Cumming resident who mock lynched him with a rope from a nearby well. Then 3 more arrests followed. Knox's cousin, 18-year-old Oscar Daniel, 22-year-old Trucy Jane Daniel, and 24-year-old Robert Edwards. Knox was snuck out the back door of the jail and transported to an Atlanta jail to await trial to avoid the Lynch Mob waiting for him. On September the 10th, a Lynch Mob, 2,000 people formed. They stormed into the jail cell. They dragged Rob Edwards out. They brutally beat him and shot him multiple times, then hung his body on a telephone pole while people took turns shooting him. Not a single person was held accountable for the lynching, despite thousands of witnesses. Edwards died without the chance of due process. On January the 23rd, 2021, Robert Edwards was commemorated in downtown Cumming, Georgia.
We will picket, we will sit in, we will march, we will boycott, we will do whatever comes within the purview of nonviolence, and I'm talking about all-out movement. We will jail in, suffer, we will be beaten, bleed, and it's a good possibility that many of us will die.
They wanted to increase awareness of the lynching of Rob Edwards and memorialize him, as well as the countless black families who were tortured, terrorized, and in some cases killed. Following the lynching and the death of Edwards, the racial cleansing began. A white mob known as the Night Riders raided the town of Oscarville, burning down their churches, farms, and businesses. 98% of its black residents would end up either leaving their homes or being murdered for a refusal to move. In October, Ernest Knox and Oscar Daniel were both found guilty of the rape and death of May Crow. The all-white jury took little over an hour to convict Knox and Daniel for Crow's killing. Trucy Daniel charges were dismissed after the prosecutors and judge visited her cell and cut a deal with her, telling her to testify against Daniel and Knox. Over 5,000 people gathered to watch the hanging of 16-year-old Ernest Knox and 18-year-old Oscar Daniel. With little to no evidence, many still believe the boys were innocent. Victims of Lake Lanier.
In a statement from DNR, a warning about the low lake levels. They stress, be sure you are very aware of lake conditions and depth. Conditions many visitors may take for granted.
Timothy Klein Thomas, 61 years of age, was found dead in Lake Lanier at about 12:30 p.m., a short distance from a boat ramp at the park. Thomas' family members contacted the sheriff's office early Saturday morning asking for a welfare check on Thomas. The family member said Thomas had sent them texts threatening to harm himself. Deputies searched the area near Thomas' home and found his vehicle at the gate of the park's boat ramp just before 7:45 a.m. Personnel with the Georgia Department of Natural Resources and the sheriff's office both began a search of the lake as they believed Thomas could be in the water. His body was located a short time later. Foul play was not suspected. Melvin Warnick, a 78-year-old man, drowned at War Hill Park on the Forsyth-Dawson County line on May 12. Officials responded that Friday afternoon after reports of a drowning. They later found the man's body 20 feet from the water. Terry Daughtry, 57 years of age, was reported missing at the Sunrise Cove Marina off of Flat Creek Road. A friend said he last saw Daughtry at 9 p.m. on Monday night at the dock at the marina where his boat is kept. Neighbors say when they woke up on Tuesday morning, they weren't able to find him. Officials later found Daughtry's body alongside the dock near where the boat was docked. Tracy Stewart, a 60-year-old from Stone Mountain, was swimming from a boat near East Bank Park off Lake Lanier when he disappeared. Stewart never resurfaced. A few hours later, officials pulled his body from 46 feet of water. Leonardo Martinez, a boat mechanic, disappeared while swimming near Van Park in Hall County on July 29th. The Georgia Department of Natural Resources confirmed to Channel 2 Action News that game wardens found his body on August the 3rd around 9:30 a.m. His body was floating on the surface about 30 yards from the shore. Brian Tarasona. Hall County officials have identified a Lawrenceville man who died after he drowned on Lake Lanier Monday night. The Hall County Sheriff's Office said Brian, 22 years of age, was swimming with other people at about 6:30 p.m. Officials did not specify what caused Tarasona to drown, but they said he ran into some trouble while he was on his way back to the shore. Witnesses said the victim swam out into deep water, and as he was attempting to return to shore, he went under and did not resurface. Edgar Stephen Cruz Martinez, a 23-year-old man, drowned while swimming at Lake Lanier Saturday. According to the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, Edgar Stephen Cruz Martinez was swimming at Lake Lanier in Gwinnett County when he went under and did not resurface. Georgia DNR game wardens, Gwinnett firefighters, and Forsyth County deputies responded to the call just after 3 p.m. on August 26. Soon after arriving, game wardens were able to locate the deceased victim in approximately 10 feet of water with boat-mounted sonars. Gwinnett Fire Rescue swimmers recovered the body. Garvey Whitlock, a man, drowned at Georgia's Lake Lanier after he ran down a dock and slipped into the water, marking the 8th death at Lake Lanier this year. Garvey Whitlock, 23 years of age, was found dead at the Holiday Marina on Lake Lanier by the Hall County Fire Rescue on Saturday night. The Department of Natural Resources responded to a drowning call at the lake's oldest and largest marina at around 10:30 p.m. after Whitlock fell into the water and did not resurface. Jose Camarillo, officials from the Georgia Department of Natural Resources have identified the 20-year-old man who drowned while swimming at Lake Lanier over Memorial Day weekend. Jose Camarillo of Stone Mountain was recovered by Hall County Fire and Rescue, said department spokesman Mark McKinnon. Game wardens reportedly located Camarillo's body near the Margaritaville area on the lake using sonar equipment. Thomas Milner, a 24-year-old man, died after being electrocuted when he jumped off a dock into Lake Lanier on Thursday. The Georgia Department of Natural Resources told news outlet that a neighbor was able to pull the man from the water. The man was taken to Northside Forsyth Hospital where he later died. So in conclusion, I know what you're thinking. Is it haunted? I will say there's something that we don't know. But what I can say is that blacks were present and they were forced out. But those spirits still remain. So next time you go to Lake Lanier, just ask yourself this question. With all these people that constantly drown and they never resurface, let's just say they do. Maybe our ancestors are trying to speak up and say something. On that note, you have Oscarville.